Hey folks, I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Katie Rife.
The fall movie season is in full swing, and that means we're getting a first look at some of the major movies of the rest of 2021. On this week's episode, Katie and I discuss three of the big auteur works of October, all opening this week or next. Denis Villeneuve's enormous adaptation of the sci-fi novel Dune, Wes Anderson's foray into anthology storytelling, The French Dispatch, and the latest genre blender from Edgar Wright, Last Night in Soho.
Welcome to Film Club.
Okay, folks, thanks again for joining us for a new episode of Film Club. We are doing what we like to call around here a review episode this week, where we just talk about some new movies. Who would have thunk it? Which is funny because that's kind of what Film Club used to be almost exclusively. It was just every week we would just talk about what the new movie was. I'll say those are easier to prepare for in general. Often,
I do like our more ambitious episodes, but you're right that I love research. It's one of my favorite things to do, but like it is kind of time consuming.
Yeah, I mean, when we do an episode like for example on cinema score, we try to do our research. So a review episode, I mean, we're often preparing to review these films anyway.
Yep.
So sort of two birds with one stone.
Do you consider it part of your job to keep up with major new releases, even if you're not writing reviews of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. I mean, you want to, by the end of the year, you want to have, if for nothing else, because your end of the year list should reflect a wide, there should be the implicit knowledge for readers that you have seen enough movies to actually say what the best movies of the year
exactly.
are.
These aren't the 10 movies you saw that year. You saw most everything, and this, I do feel that it gives your rankings more weight when you have seen more stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just above the 100 line for the year.
Same, yeah. I actually, this is a little how the sausage gets made for readers. Our regular contributors who contribute to our year-end list at the end of the year, I always basically say to everyone, make sure you hit 100 movies. You know? I think we did 75 last year.
I try to do 150 because I'm like, I don't know, ambitious, I guess.
I mean, this is our bread and butter. This is what it's about for us, you know.
And truly, the more that you've seen that year, the more that you really know what the spread is. And you can pick out the best stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think you notice a difference when a critic has not watched a lot throughout the year. And I think that your list is often going to be more idiosyncratic, more eccentric, more singular, I think, if you actually try your best to see a lot of things, because it won't just end up looking exactly like every other top 10 list out there.
Yeah, and you know what? I really think that's true because here's more sausage getting made. When I first started AV Club, I wrote news all day, and so, you know, I didn't spend as much time on film reviews. And so I would catch up with the stuff that I had already heard was good, you know? And and you do end up with a more, I guess, standard top 10 when that's the approach that you take rather than just watching as much as you possibly can, which I can do now because I spend more time on film.
Totally. It's tricky, though, because often I find, I mean, there are those who would disagree with me on this, I think, but I find often when there are certain movies that are showing up on a lot of top 10 lists, there's no conspiracy there, and I don't think it's totally just groupthink or critics being sheep. I think some movies rise to the top because they really are that good.
No, I think so, too. I think that, like, it's just obvious when something is inspired, I think. And like, you know, I mean, I've written about this before and we've talked about it on the podcast before. The idea of like objective quality can get a little bit sticky when you really get into like
no such thing.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
But
I think there are opinions and informed opinions is what I always say.
Right, okay, you know? But I think that like good craft is pretty obvious in a movie. You can tell when the director knows what they're doing.
And you can especially tell when they don't know what they're doing.
Oh, yes, that's true.
So we're talking about three movies today on the show. Two of them are now available to watch. One of them is in theaters and on HBO Max. The other one is in theaters. And a third film, which is opening next week, that will be in theaters exclusively. All three of these films are from filmmakers who I would say know what they're doing.
Yes, I think we can give them that much.
Yeah, from a craft perspective, at the very least, these are very accomplished filmmakers.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we mentioned them up top, but the three films we're talking about today are Dune, The French Dispatch, and Last Night in Soho. Three movies that I was very excited for leading up to this, to this season that we're in now.
Yeah, these were some big anticipated titles for the year, and I believe all three of them were delayed.
Yes, all three of them were delayed. Yeah, they were all supposed to open last year. I feel like Last Night in Soho has been delayed. Maybe the longest of this crop. I feel like it was originally supposed to open in spring of 2020.
Oh, wow.
That didn't happen.
Clearly.
Yeah. So all of these, took a long COVID delayed route to theaters, but they are here now.
Yes, they've made it finally.
Yep. So let's start with Dune.
Okay.
Start with Dune. Dune obviously is the new adaptation. I guess you could call it the third adaptation, the third screen adaptation of Frank Herbert's 1965 sci-fi novel, which obviously inspired a whole series of books and
graphic novels. And Frank Herbert died, but his son Brian Herbert is still expanding the Dune universe. Like you can really. There's a lot of material to explore here, for sure.
Even if you've never read Dune, and I've never read Dune, any of the Dune books.
Yeah.
Even if you've never read it, you have seen its influence on other science fiction.
Oh, big time. Yeah, for sure. I read the first Dune, but don't know the series. I can't speak to the whole series.
It's my understanding that it's very nerdy.
It's full of ideas, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. It's an idea. I think it's what people traditionally call hard science fiction.
Yes. This is something I was talking about with Danette Chavez, our TV editor, because she's really into science fiction. And Foundation just came out, which is another hard sci-fi novel. And we were talking about the difficulty of adapting those sorts of works for the screen because they are very cerebral and abstract just by their very nature.
Yeah, and honestly, if I'll tease my feelings about this movie, I guess, a little bit, but I am not convinced. Having seen this and The Lynch, I have not seen the 2000 miniseries, which
I haven't seen.
No one seems to like that. But the two movies I've seen, I remain unconvinced that this is actually especially cinematic material.
I mean, the thing about it is there's some really righteous sci-fi ideas in it. Yeah. So, it's got these giant sandworms. It's got space witches. It's got, courtly intrigue. It's got a lot of elements that could work, for kind of a rollicking sci-fi adventure. But the whole tone of the thing being hard sci-fi and being kind of intellectual, that's the part that's difficult to translate to the screen.
It's very solemn.
It's not a very funny book.
It's not funny. I mean, again, I've never read the book. Maybe the book's different. I don't find it particularly exciting on the screen. I don't think this story is especially exciting.
I think that this new one is especially somber.
Yeah.
Even compared to David Lynch's movie, because, that's got a little bit of a madness to it, a little bit of out there kind of wackiness to it.
Yeah, I mean, Lynch embraced the weirdness of this source material. That was probably his interest in it, really.
Yeah, probably. I love it's not a great film or anything. Maybe if it was 3.5 hours long, it'd be a great film.
Yeah.
That's another thing about Dune that I'm sure we'll talk about, that it kind of has to be super, super long.
Yeah.
But I love the opening scene where they kind of wheel in the brain in the jar to talk to everybody. That scene's so cool.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, so this version is directed by Denis Villeneuve. And of
Arrival, if you saw Arrival.
Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, Sicario. He's a French-Canadian art house filmmaker who went Hollywood in a big way a few years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
He now only kind of exclusively makes blockbusters, but
sci-fi ones too, because he didn't always exclusively do sci-fi, but now he seems to be exclusively doing sci-fi.
Yeah, his last three have all been science fiction, and he seems to have gotten into the IP business as well, obviously. But I would also say that as a blockbuster filmmaker, he is interested in slightly more esoteric properties.
Yeah, I would say so. And I thought that visually this film had some Denis Villeneuve in it. Just sort of he really likes that sort of overcast look, that sort of gray, overcast, sort of, wet concrete, brushed metal, whatever you want to call it, type of
gunmetal.
Gunmetal type of not color palette, but there's a pall over everything.
For sure. I mean, I would say it's kind of a limited color palette in a lot of senses.
This is true.
It's sort of grays, blues, and oranges.
Yeah, I'd be blown away if he had Argento colors in one of his movies. I'd be like, what? It'd be a huge surprise.
Let's get Nicholas Winding Refn's Dune.
Oh, dude. I'd watch that.
He would embrace the weird of Dune.
He would. And I guess to get back to the weirdness of Dune and the somberness of Dune and the intellectual part, there are some really cool scenes in it. Like there's a scene here. It's in all the versions and it's in the book too. There's a really cool scene that's right at the beginning of the book and it's at the beginning of the movies too that I really like. It's so you have Paul Atreides, who in this one is played by Timothée Chalamet. And there's a lot of backstory to him, but basically he is the son of like a big duke. They have kind of a feudal system. It's supposed to be the far future, and they've gone back to feudal ways for a lot of reasons that the movies never really get into, which is too bad. And he's visited by the Reverend Mother of this order. This is why I like Dune. It's got space witches, y'all. This order of, space witches called the Bene Gesserit. And the Reverend Mother comes to see him and puts his hand in a box. And he's supposed to, not flinch from the box because she's got a poison needle right next to his neck, and it's kind of a test of his fortitude. And that scene's really cool. And when you read the book, there's all these like kind of eloquent passages in it. And I can't recite the whole thing, but because they excerpt stuff from like the holy books that they have in this society. And there's this famous monologue that starts with fear is the mind killer, fear is the little death, blah, blah, blah. And that stuff's pretty cool. Like it's kind of eloquent, and some of it's not bad advice for life, actually.
Dune as a guide to living.
Maybe, yeah. Like there is some of that kind of element to it.
Okay, can you give folks just a quick log line for those who, like me, have never read the book, and maybe for those who have never seen any version of this? What is Dune about? Simple version.
Dune is about a fancy boy prince with mind powers who gets sent off to a desert planet, and then his family gets betrayed, and so him and his witch mom end up in the desert, and he becomes a chosen one.
Yeah, that's about right.
That's what happens.
Obviously, that's the simplified version of it. There's a lot of feudal politics in this thing.
I'm being irreverent, obviously.
Yeah. We've sort of alluded to this, but the challenge, I think, of adapting this novel is that there's a lot in it. It's very dense. Mm-hmm. It's dense with mythology. It's dense with feudal politics. Mm-hmm. There's just a lot in it. So the challenge kind of becomes for somebody adapting this, what do you include, what do you not include, and also how do you just handle the pure scope of it? Mm-hmm. Lynch's approach was to condense.
Yeah. To
try to get all of that first book into a single movie. The result, I think, as a piece of storytelling is pretty incoherent.
Yeah, it does not make a lot of sense.
Really hard to follow.
It really doesn't.
I think you and I might disagree on this point, honestly. I don't know if I love this take on it either, or this approach to adapting it, because watching this, I was like, this is a lot of setup. And then it really does become half of a movie.
It really does stop. This
it doesn't end,
really
it
does stop. Yeah. They don't really... I thought that what could have been the climactic scene was very underplayed, which I thought was kind of strange. But I mean, in my opinion, he's just being faithful. That's just being faithful to the text in that. And splitting it where they split it is just being faithful to the text. And is he undercutting himself dramatically by doing that? Maybe.
Yeah, because my sort of question is, I know that we live in an era where faithful adaptations are now gospel, where every adaptation of something that's popular,
and people get way into these books too.
They do, and they get, but I think like anything, like comic books, like Harry Potter books, anything that has a sort of loyal, devoted sort of geek fan base, there's this sense now that filmmakers need to cater to them by being as faithful as possible, and I just sometimes don't know if fidelity is actually the best route. I kept watching this and thinking, isn't there a way that you could just kind of make this a little different? You know, like this could be one movie if you were willing to be a little adventurous in your adaptation process.
Well, they'd have to, if you could streamline the narrative, I think. Yeah. But I think that
people would then complain it's not Dune anymore.
Exactly.
A
That's
Dune
the
that
thing.
doesn't have long scenes of people having fairly boring conversations about feudal politics. Maybe that wouldn't be Dune.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to try to adapt Dune into one movie, I would take out more of the courtly intrigue stuff and leave in more of the mystical stuff. But that's just my preference in terms of what I find interesting.
Sure. I mean, I just feel like we had not centuries. we had decades of literary adaptations that dared to take what they wanted from a story. And we did a whole episode about this. We talked a few weeks ago about the art of adaptation. And I just ended up watching this and thinking that this a lot of it played like cliff notes for a book I haven't read. And that's okay. I mean, that might work for a lot of people. But the fact that it really does just end or just stop. Stop is the right word. It doesn't end. It stops.
Yeah, it just stops.
You know, and I struggle with the. I've seen this in a couple people have said this. Like, we won't really know what to think of this Dune until we see part 2.
Okay, here's my thing with that. Why didn't they just go ahead and make part 2 if that's how they were going to do it? I think it's really odd that they're dangling it in front of everybody saying, oh, well, we won't make a part 2 unless everybody goes out to see this. You know, it's very like no dessert until you eat your vegetables, which is just an odd approach. I don't know why Villeneuve didn't push to have them both made, because I think if this was a Kill Bill 1, Kill Bill 2 situation and you knew the next one was coming out next year, you might not mind the cliffhanger so much.
Well, my question, though, is does a general audience know that part 2 isn't coming? Could maybe not come. You know, we know that because we are plugged in.
Yeah, because we're plugged in. Yeah,
you know, into the news cycle of movies, and we know that Villeneuve has come forward and said that there might not be a second one if this one doesn't make money. The average person going to see this, the first thing they see, because technically the title of this movie is Dune Part 1.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So there is the assumption at the end of it. I think it implied to be continued. You know.
Yeah, I use the word cliffhanger, but it's not even really a cliffhanger because a cliffhanger like makes you excited to see the next one, and the way that they did this one. And again, like I get why they did it. That's just the text, but this one it feels more like a weak ending than it feels like a cliffhanger.
Yeah. I thought a little bit of the second Matrix movie and the note that ends on, because that really just sort of feels like this is where we're cutting this story. If you wanted to compare it to other giant sort of fantasy or sci-fi epics, I mean, you know, the Lord of the Rings films are all part of one large saga, but every one of those works really hard. And this is probably because they're based on 3 separate books, but every one of those works really hard to give you a sense of punctuation at the end of them.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I didn't get to the end of Fellowship in the Ring and think, wow, what an anticlimactic ending or what a non-ending. I thought that was an extremely satisfying film, and I want to see the next one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. For me, the main thing is that I would be totally fine with the way this one ended if it wasn't a question mark that they were going to make a 2. Like if they had already made the 2 and they're just going to put it out in the spring or whatever, like I would be totally fine with it. But the thing is that like if they don't end up making a part 2, then what a waste of everybody's time.
And they might not. I mean, I'm not convinced this movie is going to be a huge hit. I mean,
they're putting it out on HBO Max early and I don't know. They're not burying it exactly, but they're not giving it the full court press, I feel like, promotionally.
I mean, it'll be in a ton of theaters, but the fact of the matter is so was the Blade Runner movie, and that was not a huge hit, you know? And it seems like Dune is...
Do they just not want to pay for part 2, and so they're like Loki sinking it?
I think they're hedging their bets on this. I think they're basically... Because they don't give a shit if they leave us hanging.
No, they don't. They don't care about that part.
Because if we don't pay to see it, then I think generally Warner Brothers' attitude is, well, you didn't want it, so we won't give you another one. They're really just hedging their bets with this thing.
Supposedly, a news story I read is that they're going to take into account HBO Max streams when making the decision about whether or not to continue this.
Well, that bodes well then, because I think there will be people who watch it on HBO Max.
I don't know. This whole thing is wild to me because, like, it seems like everywhere I go, I see somebody reading Dune. Every coffee shop I've been to in the past, like, couple months, someone's sitting there reading Dune. All the bookstores are sold out of it. I tweeted something about this, and somebody said they were a buyer for a major chain and they can't keep the book in stock and all this kind of stuff. It's a very popular sci-fi book.
That's a good sign, too. I mean, that suggests that there's probably people out there who have never heard of Dune who are discovering it now.
I think so.
And who might go see the movie. I will say that it does benefit from having a rather high-profile cast, a large and high-profile cast.
Yeah, let's talk about the cast.
Yeah. So Chalamet is obviously that plays the main character, but the cast also includes Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar
As his
Isaac.
mother and his father.
Jason Momoa is in it.
He's Duncan Idaho, the heroic pilot of the piece.
I love that name.
Yeah, it's a cool name.
It's very funny to have this thing that's set in this really this
it's
really
like the year
sort of
10,000 and something.
distant future, and there's a character named Duncan Idaho.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a cool name.
Josh Brolin is in it as well. Remind me of what his character's name is.
Yeah, that's Gurney Halleck, and he's sort of the
Gurney Halleck.
He's sort of the right-hand man of the Duke, who's Oscar Isaac.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg with this cast. I mean, there's tons of people who have showed up in Marvel movies, for example. You got David Mascallion. You got Dave Bautista is in it as well.
I kind of enjoyed Bautista in this, just kind of standing there looking pissed.
I would have liked more of him.
Yeah,
I would have liked more of the villains, period.
Yeah.
Because Lynch was in love with the villains.
Oh, he was. He was in love with the because the main villain. So we have House Atreides, and that's our good guys that we were just talking about, who are taking over this desert planet. And then you have House Harkonnen, who used to run the planet, and they're villains, and they may have a few tricks up their sleeve. But yeah, in the book, he's described as like enormously, like just can't even walk around on his own, fat, big, and like kind of grotesque, and it's supposed to kind of be like represent his unlimited greed and his soul and all this type of stuff, and they don't even really show him in this movie. You just see his henchmen,
right?
And Sting played one of the henchmen in the Lynch movie, which was super fun.
Again, I don't know how these characters play on the page. On the screen, not terribly lively or interesting characters. They feel more like allegorical symbols than people.
Yeah, the thing is so this adaptation, I felt it was kind of flat in the sense of like you don't get a lot of the kind of subtext that you get on the page, and it was very somber in tone. Not that this is an especially fun franchise, but you could try to liven it up a little. Like nobody smiles in this damn movie.
Yeah, I mean it's a big monolithic and kind of humorless sci-fi movie.
I did think there was some cool imagery. Like there's a scene early on where they're arriving on the planet where they're supposed to take over the governance or whatever, the Atreides. And there's this kind of cool scene where they're met by this party from the emperor, because they have an emperor in this world, and and it was a combination of like Catholic vestments with space helmets. I thought that was pretty cool design.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean the reason I can't bring myself to say that I quite dislike this film, even though it did not engage me on any level other than as spectacle, but I think as spectacle, it's pretty cool to look at a lot of the time.
Yeah, it is pretty cool to look at. He does a lot of cool stuff with the sand dune. It's a desert planet, and so you get a lot of cool overhead shots of sand dunes that are sort of abstracted into these abstract shapes, and a lot of cool stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, the production design is pretty amazing. I mean, you have these giant temples and these giant ships. I do wish it was a little more varied. There's this kind of monolithic brutalist style to it.
Combined with one thing I will not defend about Dune, which is the Orientalism of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to defend that aspect of Dune.
I mean, I think you could say that this one at least diversifies the cast a little bit, whereas, earlier adaptations were just like everyone in the cast is just a white person, even the Freemen, who are specifically coded as people from the Middle East, maybe?
Yeah, Middle Eastern, like they're from the desert.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that element is still there, and I don't think you can really do Dune without it being there.
Yeah, and I think Villeneuve does have some really he does some cool stuff with the imagery of that, but I feel like it's just something that you need to know. It's just,
for sure.
You just mention it.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's funny. It is available on HBO Max, and I'm still not to a point where I feel like I want to tell people that they should go see anything in theaters. I think that is a personal choice that people need to make, and I'm torn because there's a part of me that wants to see movie theaters. Obviously a huge part of me that wants movie theaters to survive and do well, and then there's another part of me that understands that people might not feel totally safe packing into an auditorium.
It's very you do you at this point.
Pretty much
in history,
provided that you're vaccinated.
Of course.
If you're not vaccinated, stay the fuck out of the movie theater.
Not getting vaccinated is you doing everybody harm.
Yeah,
at this point, it's not just about you.
If you're vaccinated, you make your own choices. If you're not vaccinated, do not go to the movie theater. You
please
asshole.
Please don't.
But my point ultimately was that I do think this thing is something that sort of asked to be seen on a big screen.
It does. For the visuals and for the music, because Hans Zimmer did the music, and he's in his mode in this one.
This is such a loud movie, and it just rattles your fucking skeleton watching it.
And there's one cool thing that the Bene Gesserit, the space witches I was talking about, can do, where they can like command people by using a certain tone of voice, and they really rumble the seats when someone uses. They just call it the voice. When someone uses the voice in the movie, your seat really shakes in the theater, and I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's transition to talking about a film that is, in its own way, a different kind of tribute to the printed word. It's not an adaptation of a novel, obviously, but it is a tribute to The New Yorker.
Yeah.
And that is the new film
The mid-century New Yorker specifically.
Yes, exactly.
Like, yeah.
The New Yorker, probably of Wes Anderson's childhood.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I could see him being a precocious little child reading The New Yorker.
He was apparently very into it in college. He read it.
Okay.
I don't normally say this, but the press notes are really worth reading on the French Dispatch.
Really?
Yeah.
Usually they just give you information that you already know. Like the other movies that people have been in. Yep. It's more inside baseball for you.
Some of them are very useful. Some press notes are very like, oh man, they give you all of the names and places and dates. And that's just so useful.
It's so helpful, especially like if you're talking about like a sci-fi movie or something like that. You really need to know how to spell all the names of the places. Yeah. Like when I was doing Mandalorian recaps, that was a nightmare.
Yeah,
figure out how to transliterate all the places and names.
Sometimes though, press notes are just glorified. It's like extra PR for the film or something.
For sure.
It's just like all these gushing interviews of the actors talking about how great it was to work with the director. I'm like, how is this useful to me?
Just once I would like an actor to be like, no, it was a miserable experience and I hated it.
Sucked.
They don't do that until way after the fact.
And only if the movie is not successful.
Exactly.
Yeah. But the press notes for the French, I don't know why I'm talking about this. This is not something that the average listener is going to have access to. But I will say that having read those, there's some interesting background about Wes Anderson and his relationship to The New Yorker. He apparently read it a lot in college when he was roommates with Owen Wilson. I think one of the many interesting things about The French Dispatch, Anderson's new film, which is indeed a feature-length tribute to The New Yorker, among other things. I think one of the interesting things about it is that it is very specifically a tribute to particular writers at The New Yorker.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. There was only one of, forgive my ignorance, only one of the writers he was paying tribute to, I knew who they were paying tribute to, and that was James Baldwin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Wright plays a character in this film who is very, very clearly
James Baldwin. Which is kind of cool.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. He also, his character has a photographic memory, which means he can remember every word that he's ever written, which I think is a really good gag. So the film, it's Anderson's first anthology project. The film is structured around basically, it's sort of presenting in cinematic form the final issue of this fictional magazine. And this is one of many tossed off gags that I find very funny. But the magazine is it's basically the foreign branch, the French-based branch of a magazine based in Liberty, Kansas.
Yeah.
Now I looked up Liberty, Kansas. Would you like to guess the population of this quote unquote city?
8,000.
It's 123 people. Now it was maybe like 300 people or something in 1960. But nonetheless, that's a very inspired gag to do a tribute to the New Yorker where the New Yorker is based out of a town of 123 people.
Yeah. Do you think that's Wes Anderson reaching out to the middle of the country?
Oh, I do. I think it's him choosing a place that he would see as sort of, this is every town America, I think is the idea, that the New Yorker itself is, even though it's based in New York, maybe at its heart, it is
an American magazine.
Exactly. It's an American magazine. So it's also just a good gag.
Well, there's a gag in it. I'm sure we'll talk more about the production design, but one of the settings in the movie is a big, elaborate art gallery in the middle of a cornfield.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a great gag. Yeah. So yeah, it's Anderson's first anthology film. The film is structured as a series of articles in this final issue of the magazine. So we essentially get three stories out of the film, and an enormous cast. I'm just going to read a few of the names.
Yeah.
This isn't even all of them, but the cast includes Bill Murray, Owen Wilson, Adrian Brody, Frances McDormand, Timothy Chalamet, doing double duty this week, Benicio del Toro, Lea Seydoux, Henry Winkler, Bob Balaban, Christoph Waltz, Jeffrey Wright, Edward Norton. Huge cast. A lot of returning Anderson players, but also some new people who've never been in an Anderson film before, and just sort of filling out these various stories that he's telling.
I think that this is something that we've talked about before. I know, Dowd, you and I, about how Wes Anderson's style is really well suited for these sort of like vignettes and tableaus and chapter-based storytelling. Oh, we talked about it on the adaptation episode.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I think that using this short story format that he's using for this worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it fits him like a glove, honestly. And, I feel like especially since Grand Budapest, he's been experimenting with the idea of stories within stories. There's this kind of nesting doll structure to his films now, where we're sort of constantly getting layers of story, people telling stories and then people telling stories within that. And this one, I think that takes that even further because each of these stories from the magazine is also framed by a story in which the writer is appearing to talk about the story that they wrote. So we get Tilda Swinton doing an academic seminar, and then her seminar is the story within that seminar is what we're seeing, but Anderson is also cutting back and forth
to her giving the lecture.
Yeah.
And like giving kind of color commentary on the story that she's telling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It really is a device that I think just is a gift that keeps on giving.
It wasn't precious though. Because like sometimes when you're like, oh, it's about stories and storytelling, I think you want to roll your eyes all the way back in your head because it's such a common device.
Yeah.
But I thought it was very irreverent, the sort of his attitude towards these characters. Like he wasn't taking them down, but he wasn't. He had a sense of humor about it. I thought this movie had a good sense of humor about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting on what I think is one of the things that I really appreciated about this film is that it is simultaneously having fun at a little bit at some of the pretensions of artists while celebrating them too.
Writers in particular.
Especially writers, but also artists too.
Yeah, I mean, artists, and there's an artist in it and a chef and some revolutionaries, some student revolutionaries that take themselves super seriously.
And the movie sort of gently mocks them a little bit. But in the end admires their ideals, I mean, like Benicio del Toro in the first of the stories plays this. He's basically like a homicidal murderer who's also this brilliant artist.
Yeah, like an abstract artist.
Yep.
Yeah,
and he's serving a life sentence in prison, and it becomes about his work becoming discovered. And the movie is kind of poking a little bit of fun at the tortured, anguished artist. But I do think that at his heart, Anderson also admires this character too. And I think walking that line, I think it's really tricky to walk that line because to both satirize with affection, I guess I would say.
Yeah, no, it is very, very affectionate. Yeah, I think so.
And the second story is his version of May 1968. Obviously, the student protests in France during that time period, obviously, and it sort of doubles as Anderson's Valentine to that period and those ideals and those students.
And the music of that time, too.
The music of that time. and the French New Wave, I think. You know, it's very much, there's a lot of Godard and Truffaut in it. And this whole movie is just packed with references.
Yeah. I thought that Timothée Chalamet was well cast in both of the movies that we were talking about him in this week. He's really having a moment.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, I buy him as a sort of dandy prince and as a sort of
dandy fop.
I buy it. What do you know? I buy him in those roles. I just watching this thing. I'm just so impressed with how much Anderson. I mean, I feel like for many years he's just kind of been refining his style. You know, you could say that like people. I mean, Wes Anderson parodies are a dime a dozen out there.
Yeah, he's easy to parody because he's really distinctive.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's really all there is to it.
Yes, he's a filmmaker whose style can be determined by a single frame. You know, I remember
a nice symmetrical composition with some, you know, kind of ice cream pastel colors. Voila.
Ice cream pastel. I love that.
Yeah.
That's very accurate for his palette, I think. Yeah, but I think that over the years he's grown too, and he's gotten so much more meticulous, and his movies have become just these treasure troves of stuff.
Oh, you know? Speaking of style, I thought the way that they switched between color and black and white in this movie was very deliberate and very cool. I liked the way they switched back and forth. It felt very thought through.
Always very intentional, yes. And you know, he tries a couple things he's never tried before. There's this tableau effect he does that I think is designed to sort of mimic the still photography you would see in an issue of the New Yorker. I mean, he's taking some of his stylistic cues in this from the New Yorker itself. There's a whole animated sequence in it as well that seems very indebted to
New Yorker cartoons.
Yeah. And into the cover art as well.
Yeah.
And even as somebody who, I mean, I've had a New Yorker subscription before. I'm not a New Yorker head, you know. I've not been reading it my whole life or anything.
I read a lot of their stories just online, though. You know, I read a lot of their stuff.
I just think it's such a perfect. There's a perfect collision of sensibilities.
The tableau thing you were talking about, where he does these still lifes, that was actually my favorite part of this whole movie.
Oh, okay.
Because all of his style, you know, it's very meticulous, but there's something kind of imperfect about the way that he would have these so what he would do is have these big groups of people, and they would all hold a pose, but you could see that some of them were straining to hold the pose, and that added just a little bit of imperfection to it that made it really like beautiful to me.
Which I think is really important in his films. I think aspects of imperfection are often provide the humanity that detractors of Wes Anderson deny that his films have.
Yeah. And I don't think that's correct, and I think he has a good sense of humor about himself too, which kind of deflects the other main criticism that they have that he's too precious.
There's a lot of melancholy in his films too. There's a lot of melancholy in this one. The notion that he's some sort of I don't know, some cutesy-poo dollhouse maker. I mean, he certainly
If you only watched the trailers, maybe you would have that opinion.
Or the numerous shitty parodies of his stuff. You know, like, what if Texas Chainsaw Massacre was in the style of Wes Anderson? And it's always just like the most superficial reading of his films. You know,
it's really easy to do for sure.
Exactly, and to actually imitate Wes Anderson's style in an accurate way, you would have to be somebody who is as talented as Wes Anderson.
Yeah, and have the resources that he has
exactly.
too.
Yeah, I do wonder about the budgets of his films sometimes. I'm like, how did you... Supposedly this one has 130 sets in it.
Wow.
Yeah. Like almost every shot of this film supposedly jumps to a new set. And like it's remarkable. I mean, he apparently did some things to like to disguise the fact that they were like taking elements of one set and reusing it sometimes.
Well, you know, I mean, if you're shooting like prison sequences, you can, I mean, it's a concrete room. You can dress it different ways.
Rearrange it totally. It's still, though, it's remarkable that he, and he apparently like apparently just like found a French town. The film is set predominantly in this town called Ennui.
Yeah, and it has the flop district, which made me laugh. I thought that was funny. And that's where the students hang out, in the flop district of Ennui.
Yep. I actually really love that there's a fourth segment technically. Technically there's 5 because there's an epilogue as well. But there's a section that basically is just a guide to Ennui. and it is conducted by the cyclist reporter of the French Dispatch, which is Owen Wilson just cycling around telling us things about this town. And it's just this miniature. It's probably like maybe 5 to 10 minutes long, honestly, and it's just this travelogue overview of the town. And there are more gags packed into those few minutes than most movies have in their entirety.
Yeah, and each one's a different set too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this is the first one where I really made the connection that there's a lot of Jacques Tati in Wes Anderson. I don't know why I didn't see it before, but the way he uses the frame sometimes and just the density of his frames. So I mean, I'm in the tank for Wes Anderson at this point. I would say I pretty much like most of his movies. I even kind of like the ones that a lot of people don't like. I think there's stuff to really enjoy in the Darjeeling Limited, for example. This is my favorite movie of the year so far.
Hey.
I think that speaks to both how miraculously well constructed it is, but also to this not being like maybe an all-star year so far.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it like head and shoulders for you? I don't have a runaway favorite this year so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, not really.
This is my favorite so far, pretty easily. You know, there's a few I'm still hoping to see, and we've seen some things recently. I think we both liked the Sean Baker film Red Rocket. I think that's a very good film. So that's in the running as well.
There's a lot to talk about with Red Rocket too.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about that. Some point.
We should.
Yeah, if you can make it out to see this one, it is.
This is another one that benefits from being on the big screen for Tati-esque reasons, and so that you can appreciate all the detail that went into it.
Exactly. I mean, there's almost nobody working today who arranges his frames so deliberately and who gets so much comedy out of the way he arranges his frames. You know, so. Just as a marvel of composition, it also deserves to be seen on the big screen, I think.
Yeah. And the last movie we're going to talk about today, it also, like The Craft in this movie, I thought was very good. You want to talk about period detail and construction and all that kind of stuff. Last Night in Soho is strong in those areas, I thought. Yep.
Edgar Wright is no slouch, one might say. One of the things I've always appreciated about his work is his timing. He's somebody who has he's got this steel trap timing.
Oh, yeah. I thought the editing in this one was real cool, especially the way that there's one horror scene in it, like when the movie takes a sharp turn into horror midway through. I thought the editing in that scene was like really cool. It was, I don't know how to elaborate without saying too much because it's a twisty
you're
plot.
Right though. I mean, I think that I think that he can do different. One of the reasons that Wright can do different genres is that he understands timing, and I think that's a big part of comedy, but it's also a big part of horror.
Oh yeah, like I've done several interviews with people who have done both, and they say that they're very similar.
Yeah, I remember I talked to James Wan a few years ago. He had just made Insidious at that point.
Oh yeah,
and we had this whole conversation about how horror was like comedy. It was about delivering punchlines or sometimes not delivering the punchline.
Yep.
And
knowing when to deliver the punchline.
Exactly. And I think about that a lot watching his films because I think that Wan is somebody who really is concerned with that about timing as well. And anyway, he's a whole other filmmaker.
Now, Last Night in Soho, though, Edgar Wright really came up on comedies. There wasn't a ton of comedy in this one.
Very little in this one, honestly. I mean, he started moving away from. I mean, Wright sort of made his name as a filmmaker with Shaun of the Dead and with Hot Fuzz.
Love that movie.
Me too. I mean, I honestly love most of his movies.
Yeah.
But he made. He made a little bit of a transition out of that with Baby Driver, his last film, which is sort of surprising to me, anyways. His biggest hit, actually made quite a lot of money. But that film sort of started playing with the idea that like, okay, I've been doing this kind of genre parody thing for a few years.
But what if I actually did these genres, right?
Exactly. Why not just try to play it straight a little bit? And I mean, I'm a big fan of that film. I sort of love it. It's like a jukebox musical under the hood of like a car movie, and I really love that aspect of it. This one cuts comedy even more out of the equation.
Yeah.
It's like he doesn't need that net anymore.
Yeah. Like I said, it takes a hard turn into horror halfway through, but pretty early on, even in the opening scene, you have elements where you there's a foreshadowing element. I guess I'll get into it. Thomasin McKenzie plays the main character, this girl named Ellie, who's from the country, who goes to London to go to fashion school, and she lives with her grandma. And in the opening scene, her grandma mentions something to her about, "Are you still still seeing things, implying that she's psychic.
Do you think it's implying that she's psychic or implying that she has mental illness?
It could go either way. This movie definitely plays that repulsion game.
Yeah, because her mother, her mother that we learned fairly early on, died by suicide, and there's this open question: does she have?
I don't know. I think Grandma accepts it as sort of like a second sight gift type of thing because she says something about like, "Are you still seeing your mother?" And she doesn't seem concerned about it. It just seems like matter of fact, just something that they have in their life.
That's interesting. That's funny because I didn't even consider that, even though the movie obviously plays with that question throughout.
Yeah.
My first thought was, oh, they're suggesting that she also has mental illness. Like,
no, I thought it was a second sight sort of thing.
Interesting. Okay. It remains an open question throughout the film.
Yeah, they're definitely playing with that, and like Wright playing with genre tropes. That's a pretty common genre trope.
The early portion of the movie is she moved to London. She's an aspiring fashion student, and she feels out of place. And I would say this was a very relatable portion of the movie as somebody who felt very out of place when I went to college for the first time. I was in some ways a kind of sheltered kid, and those early scenes where we just see her having a really hard time adapting to
her more the kind of mean girl roommate and the more kind of urbane students who are more adult than she is.
Totally. And party animals as well, which is just totally not her. That was very relatable to me. Just flashbacks to my first year of college.
Yeah, there's a scene early on where she's just sitting in the middle of a party wrapped in her duvet with headphones on, and I was like, oh, that poor girl.
Yeah.
I took to the partying in college, so I was fine.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I guess you were cooler than me, Katie.
I was just a bad teenager. That's all.
So the movie sort of evolves from there. I mean, again, it's a Wright film, so there's an element of pastiche to it. It's doing multiple things at once. I don't think it's giving too much away to say that there is a kind of Midnight in Paris aspect to this film. Very early on, she discovers that by going to sleep in her room that she's renting.
Yeah, because she ends up leaving the dorm and staying in a rented room that she's renting from an older lady played by Diana Rigg in her last screen role.
R.I.P.
Yep.
It's interesting to be talking about this just like a couple weeks after talking about On Her Majesty's Secret Service,
right?
Where Diana Rigg played the kind of the fan favorite Bond girl. She has a significant role in this film as well. So at a certain point, Ellie discovers that when she goes to sleep at night, she is sort of transported back in time to swinging London, to 1960s London. And she's sort of, I would say her perspective is kind of glued to this young, aspiring nightclub singer.
Yeah, she's living through the life and seeing the experiences of the girl who lived in the room in the 60s, who slept in the same bed, who lived in that same space.
Yep. And she's played by Anya Taylor-Joy. These sequences are, I mean, we talk about Wright as a craftsman, but they're really well constructed scenes. The
stuff he did with mirrors and reflections and the two of them like kind of looking back at each other and cutting back and forth were really cool.
Really inventive.
Some of it was some of it had to have been digitally enhanced. I don't know how they would have been able to do some of that practically.
No, yeah. I mean, I assume that a lot of it is not practically achieved, although some of it probably is. Probably doing some things with mirroring with just the actors.
Yeah. Good year for mirror stuff because Candyman had all that cool mirror stuff.
That's true. Yep. I thought a little bit of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood during these sequences.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because
like in the recreation of the 60s?
Yeah, just this idea of like giving us this snapshot of a major international city in the 1960s and one that's very, very meticulously recreated.
Yeah, meticulously recreated. And I suppose you could say it's similar to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood too, in that it is a bit of a rose-colored glasses look back, but with a dark undertone.
Totally, yeah. It's at first it seems magical. We're meant to sort of fall for the fantasy of this time and place.
And Ellie definitely does, because in the beginning of the movie, you show that she's kind of a kid who's a little different from the other kids. She's really into the 60s, and her room is decorated in period style, and she designs at school all these 60s style clothes. She's a bit out of her time that way.
Yeah. So we're definitely experiencing it through her lens of adoration for that period.
Yeah, and it's like a wonderful fantasy for her at first.
And I would guess that probably Wright's probably Wright has some of that fascination as well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I often feel watching his movies that I'm seeing him kind of. He reminds me of Tarantino in this respect. That sometimes his movies play like a kind of daisy chain of his obsessions.
Nothing wrong with that, honestly.
No, yeah. And I think like a lot of his, I mean, this one has like a killer soundtrack, and it's, you know, I mean, in terms of getting the, I mean, I wasn't alive in the 60s, so I don't know this for sure, but I mean, it feels very much like we're being dumped into that time period cosmetically.
And there is something about the 60s too. Like I have a friend who, when you walk into her apartment, you would think it was 1965 except for the TV. Like everything in her apartment is period except for the TV.
I bet it's a beautiful space.
It's pretty cool, yeah. I keep telling her she should rent it out for photo shoots.
So, I mean, as a set piece machine, I think that this thing kept me engaged, and I was always, I think that Wright has a real sense of how to keep the momentum of a film going. As a piece of storytelling, I'm a little bit more skeptical of it.
Yeah, this one, I felt like the craft in this one was awesome. Like the period detail was awesome. Like you were saying, the it was super tight in terms of the editing, and creating the horror effects were pretty cool. But yeah, there was something I felt like. I really feel like he was playing. How do I put this? It doesn't sound too derogatory because I don't mean it in an entirely derogatory way, but it was very like male ally, very like, I know it's hard for you girls on the streets at night. And like, and I don't think he meant it in a condescending way. And I think it is earnest, but like the cynical part of me is a little bit like, yeah, okay, thanks, Edgar. Thanks for the lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could argue that it's kind of a superficial. Its interest in that is kind of superficial.
Yeah, it's heavy-handed, but it doesn't have a lot of interiority to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a filmmaker being interested in surfaces, and Wright is certainly a filmmaker, especially throughout this film, that's interested in surfaces. But at a certain point, if you're tackling something like how dangerous it is to be a woman in the city, and how exploitative the city can be for a young woman in the 60s or now.
Yeah, and particularly with her being a young, naive person who's coming to the city for the first time.
I think that if you're tackling that as subject matter, one would hope that it would go a little deeper under the surface.
Yeah, I think maybe the fact that it was kind of surface is what made me not entirely on board with that aspect of this movie.
And as much as I like his films, and I've liked the films that he's made on his own, obviously, I do sometimes miss the writing contributions of Simon Pegg.
Yeah, and Nick Frost,
and Nick
too.
Frost, yeah. Because, I mean, he's made many more films than the Cornetto trilogy. That's Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End. But I don't think it's an accident that those films have his sharpest characters in them, you know?
Yeah, his characters on his solo stuff can be a little bit empty.
A little archetypal.
Yeah.
For sure.
You know, like even, the title character in this, and not title character, but the protagonist, and then the title character in Baby Driver. Yeah. Like they both have the cipher quality about them.
Very much so.
Yeah.
They're not the most richly developed characters.
No, not really.
That's not a total deal breaker, but I will say that watching this one, I felt distinctly at times that I wish that this had richer characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least her. I wish she was a little bit of a richer character.
And I think that the stuff that I found thematically thorny in terms of the like feminism of it, I think that if she was a more developed character, that would have completely eliminated that feeling.
Totally. I will also say that I think that, along those lines, we can't really talk about the ending of this film, but I do think that on some level, film,
it trips on its own shoelaces, in my opinion.
A little bit.
I didn't really like the third act very much.
There's a twist in the film which we will not get into even in the slightest.
Yeah, we're not even going to get into it.
But I think that in terms of what this movie wants to be about, I don't know if it's the smartest choice.
Yeah.
As a screenwriter,
This to me felt like one of those endings where like they were gearing up for an ending and then we're like, we can't quite end it there. We need to add something else. It felt like it was tacked on a little bit.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It is built around a good performance, I will say, the ending. But that's all we're going to say about that. I don't want to risk anything further about it. My only other thing about this film is that I think that one of the things he's tapping into is Repulsion, Roman Polanski's film that's sort of about a young woman losing her mind in 1960s London.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure
In
that
her apartment, even.
Yep, in her apartment. That's very clearly one of the touchstones in this one. And I remain unconvinced that Wright quite has the right sensibility for something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know, in terms of the notion of like reality sort of folding in on itself in really insidious ways. I didn't get the impression. I mean, everything in Wright's film is sort of a set piece.
Yeah, for
He's
sure.
Kind of filmmaker who makes everything a set piece.
Right.
Like, so there's never this kind of
needle drops even when there's not needle drops.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and sometimes I really enjoy that. I really love it in Baby Driver. I love it in Scott Pilgrim. Mm-hmm. In this film, it never felt like there was ever a really solid baseline of reality to then disrupt with those intrusions because he's playing everything like a set piece.
Yeah. I could see that. I actually like this one a little bit more than Baby Driver.
Okay.
I wasn't a huge fan of Baby Driver for script and thematic reasons and character reasons, honestly. I thought the characters in Baby Driver were even more shallow than these. Yeah. But I like this one a little bit more than Baby Driver. And I will say that I was pleasantly surprised by Edgar Wright doing like blood and menace and ghosts. I thought like the ghosts in this movie were kind of cool. It's these kind of lumbering figures whose faces are blurred out. And he does stuff with like having them transparent and overlapping layers and stuff like that. That's pretty cool. I thought his horror elements were pretty strong.
So yeah, I'm a big fan of his work in general. This is probably my least favorite of his films, but I think there's still a lot in it that's worthwhile, and I still find his style intoxicating.
Yeah, as spectacle, it's top notch.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, that's all we've got for you this week. Dune is out in theaters now and on HBO Max. The French Dispatch is out in theaters, and then Last Night in Soho will be out in theaters next Friday, October 29th. In the meantime, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Film Club wherever you get your podcasts.
This week's episode of Film Club was hosted by me, Alex Dowd, and by Katie Rife. Producer is Carl Blomberg. Our editor and mixer is Zach Goldsboro, and our motion graphics designer is Julie Mullins. Stay tuned next week and we'll have a brand new episode. Thanks all.
Bye.